Good evening. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Mzansi Welcomes the World. My name is Faraz Patel. I would like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us here on Hilaal TV, DSTV channel 347. Well, South Africa taking the G20 presidency, and as the country is in this global spotlight, not only as a member of the world's most influential economic forum, but also as a voice and a representative for the African continent. At the heart of this presence is Brand South Africa, the organization tasked with shaping and promoting our country's image, both here domestically and, of course, overseas. And joining me now, I'd like to welcome the Chief Executive Officer of Brand South Africa, Neville Matjie. Neville, assalamu alaikum. Absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Yeah.
And good evening to the viewers, and thank you for hosting me.
No, absolute pleasure to have you on here, Neville. Neville, we are the president of the G20. It, of course, ends when the G20 Leaders Summit begins. So time for us to enjoy this last 11 days of it. From a Brand South Africa perspective, what message are you hoping to bring to the world about the nation's global identity and competitiveness? Because if there's one thing about South Africa, we have this uniqueness about us that supersedes many of the nations across the world.
Yeah. So, thank you for the question.
Yeah.
The beauty about our participation within the G20 stems really from the onset when we were invited onto the G20. In recognition of South Africa's current standing, firstly on the human rights protection. Of course, we've transitioned from apartheid to the new democracy, and we continue to thrive in that, and protecting all its citizens equally. And then the second part has been the number of peacekeeping initiatives we've actually driven within the African continent. That in itself says a lot about our destination, South Africa. And then the third component, of course, is our economic standing.
Yes.
Within the African continent, which, of course, we always shuffling between ourselves, Nigeria and Egypt,
Yes.
and of course being the largest economy on the African continent and most progressive, and of course most industrialized. That in itself is the core message that we're driving as South Africa, in order to really continue to position South Africa as the most competitive, not only within the African continent, but also within the global South. Why is that important? It's important because it creates a spotlight on South Africa. The G20, of course, you've got leaders bringing in not only government delegations, but also business delegates that are coming to South Africa. In the next few weeks, we're going to be really busy entertaining and showcasing the opportunities here in South Africa in terms of trade and investment. And the messaging is that South Africa is competitive and South Africa is ready to do business.
Neville, how does South Africa leverage, just take away the leadership perspective, its membership of the G20? How does the country leverage this to strengthen its national brand and international reputation? Because forget the United States, South Africa internationally is known as a country that can really offer so much in terms of investment, but also from a diplomatic point of view.
South Africa, I must say, South Africans tend to be the ones that are most critical of their own nation.
Yes, yeah.
Until you cross the border. And once you cross the border, you see how much South Africa is loved. I've had the privilege of accompanying the President as well as the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition on a number of international missions in the last few months leading to the G20. And the love that is there for South Africa is just overwhelming. Not only for the destination South Africa and what we have achieved, but the interest in doing business with South Africa is there. So from a nation brand perspective, we continue to amplify the messaging about South Africa. Of course, how we rank ourselves and rate ourselves, we look at the global reputation study and see how we perform. It's got specific elements, and we call it the brand hexagon, that specifically looks at trade, investment, exports, sports, culture, crime, etc., etc. So those are the core elements that are within the brand hexagon. Of course, all of them perform well. The one that is always slightly in the lag is around crime.
Yes.
And we don't, of course, camouflage it. We specifically focus on what the positives there are in terms of steps taken by government to deal with issues of crime. And that's the message that we continue to amplify. There's already enough that is said negatively.
Yes,
we don't need to
of course,
amplify the negative. We can only but showcase the positive that has actually been taken and the positive steps that have been taken by government.
Neville, I mentioned South Africa has this G20 membership. It's also the only African permanent member of this bloc. From a brand SA perspective, how do you use this to position itself in representing the broader African interest and opportunities on the global stage? You've mentioned it, trade, investment. How is that being done in this regard?
President Ramaphosa was quite clear when he took the presidency last year in Brazil that the G20 is, yes, coming to South Africa, but it has to represent the interests of the African continent. And you would see in the number of meetings that have been held, both on the business side as well as on the government side, that African representation has been visible. And that was a clear, decisive step that was taken by the president to ensure that the continent is fully represented and fully recognized in terms of its opportunities. How are we going to grow the pie? And if we just keep it for South Africa, we have to ensure that the whole continent, of course, shares within that. And the conduit, of course, is the Africa Continental Free Trade Area.
Yes, yeah.
And for the different businesses that will be visiting South Africa will have the opportunity to also fly to the neighboring countries, if they so wish, for them to actually explore other opportunities within the continent. That creates and South Africa, of course, it becomes easier for them to locate in South Africa because it becomes a springboard for them to move into the continent, because we've got a stable democracy. Regulatory from a business side is quite sound and quite predictable. Financial sector is very strong in South Africa, so it's easier for them to actually locate their businesses in South Africa and then expand into the rest of the continent.
You know, Neville, you mentioned the Africa Free Trade Agreement, and I had a guest from the Africa Diaspora Forum yesterday, and just to amplify on that, such an important tool in enhancing business across the African countries. Neville, before we go to the break, from a branding perspective, what are the biggest challenges South Africa faces in shaping global perceptions? I know we've got this rhetoric, which of course has been proven false on numerous occasions coming from Washington. But, you know, besides that, and of course we know it to be false, what are some of the challenges that comes in terms of the global perception of our country?
Yeah, so as I've indicated with the brand hexagon, that we've really been improving over the years. Yes, the noise that has been propelled, unfortunately, by South African groups that have gotten ear.
Yeah.
But it's not only in the far west, it's also in Europe. You see some pockets of that. But let me tell you this, the messaging around South Africa in terms of the truth far outweighs that negative.
Yes.
Because in every market that I've been to, almost every single leader that I have met, they've been quite clear that they know what the truth is about our destination. So in terms of that rhetoric, I think that in itself, it will kill itself with time, because the truth always triumphs.
Yes.
And then the second one is, of course, what I mentioned around crime, which is a major stumbling block for destination South Africa. But let me tell you...
but we're not alone in this. That's
correct.
the thing, Neville. Yeah.
Correct. I was just about to say that, of course, whichever destination you visit, you will always be forewarned to say this area is a no-go, protect yourself here, etc. And I'm yet to meet, and I keep saying this, I'm yet to meet a foreign delegate who's visited South Africa for the first time and tells me that they don't want to come back.
Yeah.
Every single person that I have met, they say, we love South Africa, we want to come back. And numerous others come back over and over. And when they come back either to invest, or their children come to school at our universities, because they can really see that South Africa is a true gem. So, and of course, it's cheap for them in terms of the currency, for them to come and do business in South Africa, and to also use our holiday facilities to bring their families into South Africa.
You know, it's another sector of our society that does well in promoting us, our sports teams.
Correct.
They do an absolutely fantastic job with regards to that. Well, after the break, I continue my conversation with Neville Matjie. We're going to be discussing trade, tourism, innovation, especially on the topic of the economics of our country. How much can this G20 presidency be leveraged by South Africa? Do stay tuned. We'll have more for you after this break. Welcome back to Mzansi Welcomes the World. I'm still in conversation with Neville Matjie, who is the Chief Executive Officer of a brand South Africa. Again, Neville, thank you so much for staying with us. Neville, in what way being part of the G20 will enhance investor confidence and promote South Africa as a destination for trade, tourism and innovation?
The President has been quite clear in his mandate to all of us, including in the networks that the bilaterals that have taken place with the business community, that we need to diversify in terms of our markets from an export perspective, so that you don't find yourself just keeping all the eggs in one basket. And then the second part is, of course, diversification in terms of opportunities within destination South Africa, led to innovation and new technologies and new thinking in terms of business opportunities. So that has been at the core. But underlining all this is, of course, access to finance. The G20 will be an important catalyst to having a discussion around that. The B20 has got a clear mandate in terms of what it is they're putting forward from an access to finance perspective, and the correlation between what they've put forward, linking that to the G, would be very important to see ultimately within the resolution stage. And then the last area really is specifically focused on eradicating red tape. You can't get rid of tape. Tape is necessary because it allows for institutional processes. So of course you've got to apply for a license, for a permit, etc. But it's a question of shortening the time frames and of course improving efficiencies, so that the climate of doing business becomes more palatable for both domestic investors as well as foreign investors. So that has really been the drive from a government perspective.
A lot of what's going to happen in the G20 is that providing opportunities for partnerships and foreign direct investment. I know Brand South Africa goes around with the presidency in terms of really trying to play its part in convincing the world that South Africa remains an ideal place for foreign investment. How does Brand SA play this and the importance of this, especially when it comes to diplomatic and economic engagements?
So our focus has been predominantly on positioning South Africa as a competitive destination for investors. So mostly speaking on the economic side. Hence, a lot of the work that we have done has been mostly linked to Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, specifically focusing that agenda that President gave to all of us, that we've got to drive, of course, the growth rate of South Africa, improve on that, and ensure that we bring in more investments into destination South Africa. And more investments also mean those investors will have local partners as well, for them to actually drive some of those businesses domestically. So that has been quite an important task. Underpinning that is the diplomatic area.
Sure.
And within the diplomacy, we've got economic diplomacy, which has really been driven by most of our missions in different markets. And as Brand South Africa, we collaborate with the different missions to host, together with the DTIC, to host investment days or investment seminars to really showcase all the opportunities in South Africa. There's a team currently now in China that's working with our embassy in Beijing, doing a program there. They've just done something in Hong Kong. We did a program in Vietnam during the presidential visit. There was another program in the Gulf region. So a lot of these are really to ensure that we get the message out there about South Africa. If we don't amplify the message,
Sure.
then the destination will not understand what we have to offer.
Without a doubt. Neville, the collaborative efforts, how important is it between or with the African Union and other African nations to ensure a cohesive continental narrative during global engagements like the G20? So I'd like to think this is not just South Africa's G20, it's an African G20 as a whole. And it would be unfair of us not to really have our fellow African countries being part and parcel of this conversation from economics to diplomacy.
The president was clear when he took the G20 presidency that it's an African G20, as I mentioned earlier. And in all the major work streams and the meetings, counterparts within the continent have been invited. And I know that even for the G20 itself, the Leaders Summit, that quite a number of African leaders will also be coming to participate in the G20. Because it's important for us to expand on trade within the continent. As you know, it's sitting at between 16 and 18%, depending which statistics you look at. But of course, when you're looking at South Africa's trade within the continent, we're much higher in terms of our trade. I think we're sitting about 36%. But intra-African trade at 16% is not good enough. If you look at intra-European trade, it's at over 60%. Intra-Asian trade is about 55%. Yes. So there's no reason why intra-African trade should be sitting so low. So hence the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement was put in place to encourage intra-African trade. And of course, it's starting to build momentum now. There are instruments that have been put in place by the Africa Import-Export Bank to support that initiative in terms of trading and inter-regional trading. And so as a result of that, it creates an easier momentum for businesses to buy products from other destinations that you would not necessarily have in your destination.
One final question, Neville. As we look beyond this year's G20 summit, because of course this is only for the 2 days, what key outcomes or partnerships would brand South Africa like to see emerge beyond this? Because this mustn't just be a talk shop. There needs to be actionable, tangible outcomes that comes from this.
Yeah, so the first one, very importantly, is how do we ensure that the opportunities that have been packaged are realized into tangible projects? And most times the stumbling block is access to finance. How do we unlock that component of accessing finance to fund a lot of the projects and to get the projects going? Because those projects will, of course, create jobs and lower unemployment. Then the second component is intra-regional trade within, not only within the continent, but of course we are biased, being African, to specifically start at home and then look outwards. But within trade, the critical component that is being driven by our government is around localization. Localization at source. So that raw materials don't leave the continent of Africa and come back as finished products. So there needs to be a clear commitment around how we actually drive localization at source and ensure that there's enough value addition before those products actually leave the continent. So that's very, very important. And of course, issues around climate, regardless of what is being said around climate, if you see the impact of climate and what it has done in particularly our coastal regions and how that has impacted and shifted how business has had to look at specific regions because of the impact of climate, and also forcing our own local municipalities to plan differently, because you have to cater for climate impact, for floods. The 1 in 50, you're now realizing it 1 in 10 years or 1 in 5 years. So you have to change how you're viewing your infrastructure, your planning. So all that translates, comes back to the drawing board. So the G20 will become a catalyst to driving those discussions. And then, of course, from a technology, fintech, and all the techs that are there, how do we ensure that those translate into new innovation? We can't be left behind in terms of technology. We've got to always be in the forefront, and we've got to also ensure that we keep up with the rest of the world. And the G20 is a good platform for us to leverage of that. The B20 actually have done an amazing job in terms of the technology element. So those are areas that we would want to see.
Neville, absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us here on Mzansi Welcomes the World. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Walaikum salam.
That's Neville Matjie, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Brand South Africa. After the break, I'm going to be speaking with Richard Worthington. COP30 is currently on the go in Brazil, but climate and the discussions on climate will also be a discussion point in the G20 Leaders Summit. That discussion is after the break.